Welcome back to Your Personal Brand Core Story Part 2, how to structure your story to be interesting, compelling, and inspiring. First, I'm going to start with a little bit about where stories can go wrong and why it's so important to get this piece right. Then I'm going to share with you the background for the structure that I've put together, and then I'm going to walk you through the exact structure and how to pull your entire story from the beginning all the way till the end without missing any really important parts. Let's go. Why does it matter to have a really good story structure? Well, you've probably had the experience of listening to someone tell a story that seemingly has no point, has no beginning, middle, or end, or that just meanders and never really connects with you. I don't know about you, but there's someone in my family who shall remain nameless that ends up telling every extraneous detail and every little thing about a story, and we're just like, get to the point, please. So that's what a good story structure is going to help you avoid. Losing people, missing important parts of a story. It's going to help you stay focused, keep your stories tight, and have them follow a trajectory that makes them more compelling, interesting, and inspiring. The other benefit of this structure is that it makes it very easy to tell new stories. Once you have a story idea, you just drop it into this structure, and that will help you make them tighter, more meaningful, more useful. So there are 5 basic pieces of a great story, and these pieces are adapted from my learning from Andy Enriquez. I mentioned him in the last video. I did an interview with him for my podcast. I've had him present to my clients. He's the genius, the person that I know that knows the most about stories in my life. So this is adapted from what he taught me. I've made some changes to it because, that's what I do. The first piece is the context of the story, then the conflict, then the climax, the closure, and the conclusion. Now I'm going to walk you through each piece so that you can figure out how to put a story into this structure, and I'm going to then walk you through an example. Let's start with context. Now, context is the foundation for the story. It's the environment in which the story will take place. One of the biggest issues that I see with context is that a lot of people provide way too much of it. So for example, if you've ever heard someone tell a story, let's say about 2 people getting into a fight, but at the beginning of the story, they give you all their life history, they even tell you what they're wearing and how their hair was cut, they're probably giving you way too much context. Keep the context tight. Only provide enough background to understand the story. You don't have to give a whole bunch of details, a whole bunch of background. Give the minimal amount of context that sets up the story. So setting up the story might look like, how old were you? What's the location of the story? And what's the emotional environment within which the story is taking place? You may want to add who was there, but that may not be all that relevant, or what was going on. You probably don't have to mention what was going on, what was playing on the TV behind you. Not a lot of exposition. Let's just give the basics so that we can get to the good stuff, which is number 2, the conflict. Now, the conflict it doesn't have to be between 2 people. The conflict could even be the conflict going on within your own self. But the conflict sets up the challenge. It sets up the problem that's being faced in this story. So there are 3 basic types of conflict. There's you against yourself, you against someone else, or you against some circumstance or force that's greater than you. The third piece of the story is the climax. This is where the conflict comes to a head. This is a really important part of the story because this is where emotions get heightened in the story. The climax is the turning point. It's the peak. It's the shift. It's the transition. It's the defining moment. This might be a decision that's been made, a commitment that gets taken, a win, a loss. It might be hitting rock bottom. This may be a part in the story where you change the pace of how you tell your story. Just like I'm changing the pace right now of how I'm sharing it with you. I'm closer to the camera. I'm using more of my body language. I'm leaning in. Your body language, your voice, these are all ways that you heighten the tension of that climax. And another thing to think about in this defining moment of the climax, you may want to just bring it down to a specific moment and really focus on the senses. What were you feeling? What were you seeing? What were you hearing in this one moment? And then the closure, part 4. The closure is, how does it all resolve? What is the end result of what happened, of the action of the story? What was the outcome? How did the story end? What happened to everyone? This is where you'll close the loops. So any open loops from the beginning of the story, this is where you'll bring them into completion. And then finally, the conclusion, which is really the lessons gained from the story. What is not as the action outcome, but rather the outcome in terms of your learning, your lesson, your life. Another way to look at the conclusion is, what will your audience take away from this story? Finding the universal themes that are present in the story that can apply to anyone in your audience, anyone listening. This is a big concept I got from Andy, the idea of finding the universal theme. So even if it's a very personal story, chances are there's a theme, an emotional state, or an outcome that anybody can relate to. When you find that universal theme, you want to bring it through and talk about it at the end. Now, before I share with you my example of my story with the 5 parts, I do want to invite you to take an opportunity to like this video, subscribe to my channel so that you'll find out about future videos when they come out, and also maybe even share a comment below about what this is generating for you. So here's my example, one story that I've workshopped a little bit, but I'm actually kind of telling it in a new way today and a little bit off the cuff. So this happened when I was a few years into my business. Here's the context. I had been working my butt off. I was working nights. I was working weekends. I was waking up early, going to sleep late. I was thinking about work. If I wasn't working, I felt guilty for not working. My whole life was taken up with working. And my parents noticed. They thought, Michelle, they would say, Michelle, you're such a workaholic. When are you going to relax? When are you going to enjoy yourself? They were worried about me. But I ignored everybody. I was like, once I make it in my business, then I'll take care of myself, then I'll relax and I'll go on vacation. I was waiting until these things happened to really focus on my self-care. And then my grandmother got really sick and was put into hospice care, and she was dying. And I witnessed her go through this process of coming to terms with the end of her own life. And she was very sad. She was very regretful. She had a lot of fear about what was next. And I had to witness all this. And I remember that when she died, when she passed away, and we planned the funeral for her, I went to the funeral, and in the funeral, all I could think about was work. All that would go through my mind was my to-do list. At my own grandmother's funeral, I was obsessed. I was like OCD with this funeral. By the way, this is where we're getting to the climax part of the story. And all of a sudden, everything slowed down. I remembered the frankincense that they were burning in the church. And I remember feeling this wave come over me of just regret and sadness. And what I felt, and I don't know what the truth of it is, but what I felt was that I was feeling my own grandmother's regret of how she lived her life flow through me. And I felt the regret for my own life that I wasn't living, and for the draining out of me of my life force energy, just like my grandmother's. I feel like her life and my life kind of came together in this one moment in that church, where I just had the realization that, like, I was doing it too. I was doing just what my grandmother did. I was living my life for everyone else, for everything else, and not for me. And I made a decision in that moment: enough of this. This will change. I will figure out another way to do business. And that was one of the very first times in my business that I started to look at what brings me joy. How do I want to live? Rather than how do I just make money? How do I get more status, more significance? So that's the very, very beginning of me doing all this work that you see me doing here today was in that moment, in that church at my grandmother's funeral. I want to share that with you because maybe there are some of you here in this audience, right? Pretend I'm speaking on a stage. In this audience who have had a similar experience, that you've been living your life for everyone else or for who you think you should be, and doing all the things that you think you should do, but not really living for yourself. Well, I hope that you can use this opportunity in my story to really ask the question of, what do I want? Who am I really? What makes me happy? So that's the story. And I walked you through all of the parts of the story and ended with that universal truth of if you're living your life for other people, for that which is outside of you. Now, if you're in my retreat program, then you can download the worksheet that's in the Thinkific library. You can fill it out and you can follow along and create your own story. And if you're not, I invite you to just use a piece of paper and fill out the 5 stages and take your stories through this structure, each of the stories that you came up with in part 1. I hope you're enjoying this series of your story. I have one more part left to the series, and that's where I'm going to talk about how to weave your story into various aspects of your marketing and your branding. I'll see you in the next video.